They told her the bell under the bed would only ring when she wasn't alone. In a quaint countryside inn, nestled among rolling hills and ancient trees, Nora found herself seeking temporary refuge. The 25-year-old schoolteacher had been forced to leave her apartment due to an unexpected fumigation, and this secluded retreat seemed like the perfect escape. Little did she know that her stay would become a nightmare that would haunt her for years to come. As Nora settled into her room on the second floor, she couldn't help but notice the peculiar atmosphere that seemed to permeate the old building. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the wallpaper peeled in places, revealing glimpses of darker patterns beneath. The innkeeper, a wizened old woman with piercing eyes, had given her a strange warning as she handed over the room key. "Whatever you do, dear," the old woman had whispered, her voice barely audible, "don't touch the bell under the bed. It's been there for generations, and it only rings when you're not alone." Nora had laughed nervously, assuming it was just a local superstition or an attempt to spook tourists. But as night fell and shadows crept across the room, she found herself unable to shake the uneasy feeling that had taken root in her chest. The first night passed without incident, though Nora's sleep was fitful and filled with strange dreams. She awoke feeling unrested, the memory of whispered voices and distant laughter lingering at the edges of her consciousness. As she went about her day, exploring the nearby village and grading papers, she tried to push the innkeeper's warning from her mind. It was on the second night that things began to change. Nora had just settled into bed, the old springs groaning beneath her weight. When she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible tinkling sound, her heart began to race as she realized it was coming from beneath the bed. Slowly, carefully, she leaned over the edge of the mattress, her trembling hand reaching down to touch the cold metal of the bell. As her fingers brushed against its surface, the ringing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Nora's ragged breathing. She pulled her hand back quickly, her mind racing with possibilities. It must have been the wind, she told herself, or perhaps a mouse scurrying across the floor. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The next day, Nora found herself drawn to the local library, searching for any information about the inn or its mysterious bell. The librarian, an elderly man with thick glasses and a permanent frown, seemed reluctant to speak about it at first. As Nora pressed him for details, his resolve crumbled. "That bell," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's been in that room for over 100 years. They say it belonged to a young woman who died there, though no one knows how. Some claim she was murdered, others say she took her own life. But all agree on one thing: her spirit never left that room." Nora felt a chill run down her spine as the librarian continued. "They say she rings the bell to warn the living when other spirits are near. But be careful, miss. Some spirits aren't content to simply watch. They hunger for the warmth of the living, and they'll do anything to feel it again." That night, as Nora lay in bed, every creak and groan of the old inn seemed amplified. She found herself straining to hear any hint of the bell's delicate chime, both dreading and anticipating its sound. Hours passed, and just as she was beginning to drift off to sleep, she heard it, a clear, silvery note that seemed to hang in the air. Nora's eyes snapped open, her body frozen in fear. The ringing continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the sound of Nora's thundering heartbeat. Slowly, she became aware of a presence in the room. It wasn't something she could see or hear, but rather a feeling, a heaviness in the air, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but lie there in the darkness. But her body refused to obey, paralyzed by a terror she had never known before. And then she felt it, a cold, ethereal touch on her arm. It was as if icy fingers were trailing along her skin, leaving goosebumps in their wake. Nora's breath caught in her throat as she realized with horrifying certainty that she was no longer alone in the room. The touch moved up her arm, across her shoulder, and towards her face. Nora squeezed her eyes shut, silently praying for it to stop, for morning to come, for this to all be a terrible nightmare. But the cold sensation persisted, tracing the contours of her cheek with an almost tender curiosity. Suddenly, the bell began to ring again, louder and more frantic than before. The ghostly touch vanished, and Nora felt a rush of air, as if something had fled from the room. She lay there, trembling and gasping for breath, until the first rays of dawn began to creep through the window. As soon as it was light enough, Nora packed her bags and fled the inn, ignoring the knowing look in the innkeeper's eyes as she handed back the key. She drove for hours, putting as much distance as possible between herself and that haunted room. But even as she returned to her newly fumigated apartment, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her home. In the quiet moments before sleep, she would sometimes hear the faint, distant sound of a bell ringing, a chilling reminder that some things once awakened can never truly be left behind. For years to come, Nora would wake in the night, her heart racing, convinced she could feel cold fingers tracing patterns on her skin. And in those moments, she would find herself longing for the warning chime of that old bell, even as she dreaded what it might reveal. The experience at the inn had changed her, opening her eyes to a world beyond the veil of the living. She became more attuned to the whispers in the shadows, the fleeting movements just out of sight. And though she never returned to that countryside retreat, part of her remained there, forever bound to the mystery of the bell under the bed. As time passed, Nora found herself drawn to other haunted places, seeking answers to questions she couldn't quite articulate. She collected stories of ghostly encounters, of objects that seemed to hold echoes of the past. And always, in the back of her mind, she heard the silvery chime of that bell, warning her of unseen presences. She learned to live with the knowledge that the world was far stranger and more terrifying than she had ever imagined. But she also found a strange comfort in it, knowing that even in death, some part of us lingers on, reaching out across the veil to touch the living. And so, dear viewer, the next time you find yourself in an old inn or a creaky house, pay attention to the sounds in the night. Listen for the faint ringing of a bell, and remember, it might just be warning you that you're not as alone as you think. Still watching? If you're brave enough for more, drop a like and follow 4 stories that keep you up at night. After all, the veil between our world and the next is thinner than you might believe. And who knows what might be waiting on the other side, eager to make your acquaintance.